So my name is Nissan Gandhi. I'm an organizer for Learn Python programming here in Boston. We normally do all our events on ground, but it's a COVID time, so since last year we've been doing all our events online. Today we have Mr. Gary. He's been part of our community for a long time. I think probably from starting, like the days when we used to do our events on ground. And a little bit about Gary. He has his early career was in software engineer, and then he chose to go to law school, and then right now he's a lawyer and also software engineer, which is a very rare find. To be honest, I haven't seen anyone. Tkinter is something Gary is very passionate about. He's been using it for a long time, and he's also open source contributor in Python. In his very recent venture is building a text editor for songwriters in Python. So that is something interesting. Hopefully, one day he will give us some small presentation on his app, his venture that he's building using Tkinter in Python. So with that, I will hand it over to you. I will stop sharing, and then Gary, you can share your screen.
Sure.
Yeah. And few last thing, as always, we always share our material through our GitHub page, and chat window is always open, so you can share it that. The recording of the video will be available also online, so we will share that with you soon once it is available and modified and triggered. And as always, reach out to us. We have Slack channel. I'm always there to hang out, or if you would like to present just like Gary, let me know. We can organize that too. So with that, Gary, handing over to you. I'll stop speaking now.
Thank
Thanks.
you, Nishant. I appreciate the introduction. So I'm just going to dive right in because we have a ton of stuff to cover. For those of you who have read the Meetup event description, we're going to try to cover as much as we can tonight. There's a good chance we'll roll over till next Friday just because there's so much to cover. What I'll start with is talking about what we're going to talk about tonight, what we're not going to talk about tonight, some of the things that you're expected to know coming in, and then we'll kind of dive right in and get our hands dirty. So we're going to talk about the basics of Python's Tkinter GUI libraries. As I mentioned earlier, when you install a modern installation of Python, and this actually goes back some time, it comes with the Tkinter libraries built in. And the Tkinter libraries are sufficient to give you the ability to develop a GUI application. You don't need to install any third-party libraries or any external GUI libraries. So you've got what you need if you want to go that route. Not everybody does, and there are other GUI libraries, but Tkinter comes built in with Python, and that's what I've chosen to use. We're going to talk about 5 major topics tonight. We're going to talk about containers, and there's different types of containers. We'll get back to all of this shortly. We're going to talk about, so container is exactly what it sounds like. A container holds something, right? And in general, the container holds widgets or possibly other containers. We're going to talk about widgets, which are the actual little objects that we love to see on the screen, such as menus and buttons and so on and so forth. We're also going to talk about layout managers, which is the way you say where you want your widgets to be in those containers. We're also going to talk about Tkinter variables. They're very different than standard Python variables because they're super tuned for GUI programming, and you'll see that they're much more powerful than any standard Python variable. And then we're also going to talk about events, which are at the heart of GUI programming. And when we're talking about events, we'll also talk about bindings, which is how we get to access, how we get to tap into those events. All right. So to be here tonight, to really benefit by this presentation, you kind of need to have a working knowledge of Python. This is an intro to Python Tkinter GUI basics. It's not really a Python basics. I know that Nishant has offered Python basics previously, and I'm sure that we'll be offering Python basics again, something that Nishant and I will talk about. So you're expected to already have a working knowledge of Python, or else a lot of what we talk about could be over your head. You need to have a modern distribution of Python, at least 3.6. For those of you who are newer to Python, or for those of you who are not, who don't follow Python as closely, it's a growing, developing language. It is one of the most popular programming languages on the planet. Some would say it's the #1. Some would say it's #2. I think no one will deny that it's in the top 5, but it's a hot language and it's great to know. And as a result of this, it's always growing, it's always developing. So every later version has some new functionality. So for me, my cutoff point is 3.6 because there's something called an F string, which was introduced in 3.6. And once you've had a taste of it, you just can't go back to an earlier version. You just can't. So you've got a link to download Python 3.6 or later. I prefer 3.8. That's just my personal preference. There's more functionality that's been introduced in 3.8 as well. 3.9, they drop compatibility with Windows 7, which I don't like. So 3.8 is my target version of Python right now. And in addition to Python coming prepackaged with the Tkinter libraries, it also comes packaged with its own IDE. It's a simple IDE called idle. It's simple, it's rudimentary, but it gets the job done. And keep in mind that Python is an interpreted language. As a result, we can actually type in commands, programming code to the interpreter and see what happens in real time. And we're going to start by doing that. We're going to kind of go through 2 phases this evening. We're going to start by going through this command line stuff to quickly blow through the first 5 topics at a high level. And then we're going to start getting a little more deep into the code, in which case we'll start creating files, code files, which we will edit and run through idle. But we're going to be working predominantly with idle this evening. You do have a couple of links that are available on the screen and in the Meetup description. The first link, the quick modern reference, is the standard. That's from python.org. But lots of schools have put out their own references. And the second one, it's a little older. It's not quite as current, but it still gives you a really good idea of all the different functionality that's available through the Tkinter libraries. So having said that, I'm now going to pop up my idle window. I'm going to do some things. So if I were writing code, I would write a 3-line program that would run my first Python program. I'm not going to do that yet because we'll do that shortly, but we're going to start by just doing a quick demo of what's what. So the first thing we need to do to run Tkinter is to import the Tkinter library. All right. And for those of you a little more experienced with Python, I'm going to call it Tk just to save me some typing later on. As soon as I do that, now my Tkinter library is available to me to use as I see fit. We talked about covering 5 major topics: containers, widgets, layouts, variables, and events. So the very first container we're going to talk about is the main root window. All right. The main window of your application. Every GUI application has one. It might be hidden, but every GUI application has one. So the simplest way to create that window, that root window, is I'm going to call it root. That's a standard convention. And I'm going to invoke the Tk class. And when I hit return, you're going to see a little window is going to pop up. It just popped up over here. Move it closer. And now I've created a window. This is my root window. It's the main window of my app. And it is one of my fundamental containers. So what I can do now is I can start putting widgets right into this main root window if I want to. If I'm only going to have 2 widgets, I may do that. But I'm not. We're not. We're going to have more complicated programs. So we're going to organize our widgets accordingly. And so another type of container is called a frame. And basically, I can put my widgets into a frame. I can have multiple frames, each one having multiple widgets. And then I can put all my frames and still other widgets into the root window. I can do that as I see fit. We'll see some of that in a little bit. Next thing I want to talk about is layout managers. When it's time to put a widget into a container, you got to say how you're going to do it, where you're going to do it, right? It's a common mistake to create a widget, but not map it. So you map your widget into a container using one of the layout managers. There's 3 layout managers: pack, grid, and place. Pack and grid are the 2 most commonly used. They're the 2 most powerful. Grid is the most powerful. Pack is not as powerful, but it's sometimes more user-friendly. Place, we're not even going to talk about today because place is kind of wimpy. One thing I will mention right now is that every container can only use pack or grid. You cannot mix. If you try to mix, you'll get errors. Place is kind of wimpy. You can mix place with pack. You can mix place with grid, but you can never mix pack and grid in the same container. But you could use pack in one container, grid in another container, and then still have those 2 containers go into the root window, and it's fine. So keep that in the back of your minds. So we're going to look at layout managers a little bit in a moment. And then I mentioned that we have these Python variables, which are very powerful. And we will see one of those as we go through a very quick exploration, which we're going to do pretty shortly. And last, we'll see also this concept of events. In graphical user interface programs, everything is an event, right? If I click on something, it's an event. That makes sense, right? If I move around, that's an event. But it's even more granular than that. If I enter, if I just bring my mouse over a button, that's an event. I may not have anything happen as a result, but I get to choose whether or not I want to grab that event and do something about it, which is why you'll see in some programs, just when you move the mouse over the button might change, or you move it over to some widget and the widget changes color or gets highlighted, right? There's an event and that programmer decided to grab that event and do something with it. We'll see more of that in a moment too. And the way we're going to do that is by binding events to a function called a handler, and then the handler will actually do something in response to the event. That's our high-level overview. Now we're going to do some quick interactive coding here in our idle window, and then we'll continue on. So we're going to do some demos now with the most commonly used widget probably on the planet, the button. All right. The idle GUI has all this built-in interactive help, and it's going to give us hints as we go along, which is one of the reasons why idle is going to be a much better choice than some wimpy text editor. You know, there are plenty of other powerful text editors like Notepad++. They also have built-in support for for language support, such as languages for like Python. But right now we're going to do idle. So the first thing I want to do is create a button, and I'm going to call it B just because I want my names to be short for now. And I'm saying that I want to call up the button of Tkinter, and quick help pops up. And I know that the first thing I got to put in is the master. Basically, who's the parent of this button? We're going to, in this case, make it root. It's pure and simple. All right. Now, for those of you familiar with Python, you know that keyword arguments are these, something equals something, comma, something equals something, comma, or you can have your dictionary, and the dictionary name can be preceded by asterisk, asterisk. There's all different ways to pass in keywords. But when you're creating a widget in Python, it'll take keywords. And so I can give some keywords right now if I want to. I could say text equals my button. And I could say background equals yellow. Now I just hit return and nothing happened. And that makes sense because I told you guys before, it's one thing to create a widget, it's another thing to map it into a container. What we've done now is I know that the button has many different configurable options, and we're going to explore these more closely in just a minute or two. But I chose 2. I want the text of the button to read my button. And then I also want the background color of the button to be yellow. Now I actually have to map the button into my container. And in this case, we're going to put it right into the root window because we can do that for now. That's acceptable. So we said there's pack, there's grid. We're never going to use place, at least especially not tonight. I'm just going to call pack without any arguments. And you're going to see now that the window's going to pop, that the button will pop up into my window. Now everything has changed. All right. Now I've got my yellow button, and I've got, you notice like it's clear now. We see what we see the widget that we created. Now, one of the things to know about Tkinter, along with many other things in Python, is everything's configurable. I said, okay, I passed in text and I passed in background, but now I'm thinking, you know, I kind of wish the text were red. So I'm going to do something. Once a widget is created, first of all, I can create a widget and pass in options to create the widget the way I want. I can always go back later on and modify it. And there's multiple ways to do that as well. But for now, I'm just going to say config. And I'm going to say, you know, I think I want the foreground color to be red. And now you'll see that my button is in red text instead of black. There's all different types of appearance and visual things you can change in the button, in widgets in general. I can type B config, and I can see a list of all of them. And this is kind of messy, but it's actually a dictionary. And each dictionary has a key, followed by usually 5 entries, sometimes only 2. The 2 ones with 2 entries are what's called aliases. And let's see, I'm just going to make this a little wider so I can move it. So I don't want to get too far in the weeds, but it's important to understand that like active background is a key, it's a long key. Foreground is not what I want to talk about. So this looks like a lot, but what I can do is I can cheat a little bit and say, okay, just show me the keys of the things I can change. And now if we look down here, we see our background, which we set. We see our foreground. And, you know, all these other things are options that we can set for this widget. Every widget has possibly unique things that can be set for it, but there's going to be some common things across families of widgets, right? There's multiple types of buttons. There's a button, there's a check button, there's a radio button. They're all slightly different, but at the end of the day, they're still just buttons. So we talked about background. Border width has to do with the perimeter of the button, how wide the perimeter is. And that perimeter is called relief. We can change the relief of the button. I could say b.config relief equals, and now I can do one of 2 things. I can put in a text string solid and you'll see the button changes, right? I can also say same thing, but now make my border width equal to 5. So this is all this configuration you can do on the widget after it's created, but you can do all the same stuff as you're creating it. And there's different ways to do this too. There's also what I want to mention, these aliases, which are shorter. For example, border width is the full length. So here I'm going to say b.config border width. And you see it's going to come back with 5 things. All right. The first 5 things, the first 3 aren't that interesting to us. Those are kind of more internals for Tkinter. The 4th is the default value in the Tkinter library. And the 5th, or the last, is the value that we've set. Remember, we set border width equal to 5. Before I set it to 5, the default value was 2. And now, but I've made the current value equal to 5. So we have all these options that we can configure for the widget. Some are visual, some are functional. Now watch me as I click the button. I click the button. As I click it, you see it completely changes appearance. I release it, and it goes back to where it was. Nothing happens other than that visual. But so the internals of the Tkinter library are looking through these settings, these options. Active background has not been changed yet. So when I press, I get the default. When I release, I get now my standard background, which I've overridden. But that's all visual, that's fine. But what about the functional stuff? The functional stuff is right now more important. When I click this button, typically I want something to happen. One of the options for the Tkinter button is command. Command says just that. It says run this command when you, in this case, release the button. And when we talk about clicking a button, we're talking about the left mouse button, a left click, but it's actually the release of the left mouse button. Say on the release of the left mouse button, something will happen. So first I'm just going to create a function called clicked. It's not going to take any parameters. And I'm just going to print click. That's my whole function. When I run it by itself, I see the click I expect. Now I'm going to come up to the button. I'm going to hold the mouse button down. You see it change color. And then as I release it, you'll see it go back to its yellow, and then you'll see clicked appear again at the bottom because now it's running that command. Oh, it didn't work. Why didn't it work? Because I didn't actually configure it. I didn't tie the function to the widget. So I have to come back again and say b.config, or again, because the options are like a dictionary, there's all different ways to do it. Another way I could do it is say, okay, command equals clicked. You guys see what I'm doing here? I'm treating B now like a dictionary. B is a widget, but I'm treating it like a dictionary, and I'm going to assign this command here, which is this command option up here, to be clicked. I say that, it's happy. Now I click my button, I release it, and I see my click. So these widgets, this one, now we've tied a command to it. And remember, we talked before also about everything being event driven. When you are using a button and you're using the command option of the button, it makes it a little easier for you to handle the configuration of basically to manage the handling of the events. The command option for the button says, when you release the the left mouse button, I will handle that event by running the command that you've passed in. Okay. So they make it a little easier for you out of the box with the command option, but later in one of our sample programs, we'll see how we actually configure this from the ground up. So what else do I want to tell you? We talked about configuring. We didn't really do too much. We talked a little bit of events and binding. There's one other thing I want to talk about. When I say, I want to talk a little bit about Tkinter variables, still within the context of our button. If I say bconfig, and I say tell me text, again, we're ignoring the first three. The default for a button, when it gets created, to have nothing in its text, right? So if I hadn't set my button, there'd be no letters here at all. It would just be empty. But I set it to be my button. That is by configuring the text option of the button. But now we want to use something called a Tkinter variable. And this is an example of how we might use a Tkinter variable. This is a very common practice, in fact, in Tkinter, in Python Tkinter programs. I'm going to, instead of directly configuring the text of the button, I'm going to tell the button to use a Tkinter variable from which to extract its text. All right, it's called coupling. I'm going to couple a Tkinter variable with the widget so that when I make changes to the variable, the widget changes too. Okay, it'll make more sense in a moment when we start to do it. And again, this is all stuff we're doing right now, but this is going to get thrown away when we start doing an actual program. All right, so to create, I'm going to start by creating a string var, which is one of the 4 basic types of Tkinter variables. Up over here in our thing, we see there's for string, int, double, and Boolean. Boolean is just like it sounds, true, false. So I'm going to call this but text string var equals, I'm going to say tk dot string var, and I'm going to call that method or invoke that class, and that's going to create a new string variable, Tkinter variable of type string var. We haven't done anything yet, but I'm going to say, okay, and I want to initialize it with I can initialize it with a text value. I'm going to call it new name. All right. So when I do this and I hit enter, now I've created a new string variable, Tkinter string variable called butText underscore SV, and it's got a value of new name. We don't see it anywhere, but now we're going to couple it with the button. And as I couple it with the button, you're going to see that the text of the button changes. And the reason that this is really powerful, this isn't just something that happens for the buttons. It can happen for any widget. It's very common to have a widget tied to a variable. Your code changes the variable, and it just automatically, the widgets get updated because you've done stuff like this, you've prepared stuff like this, and you don't have to do it manually. So I can say b.config. I'm going to go this route because I just like this. I'm going to say text variable. That's the other option other than text. Text variable equals, and then the name of the variable. And when I hit enter, you're going to see this text up here on the button change. And now it's changed. So why do we care? So I could still come down here and say, okay, I've got this butText SV. So now there's a little bit of a tutorial on Tkinter variables. I've got my button text here. I can get it to see what the value is. And I see its new name, which makes sense. That's what we see up above in the button. I can also set it. And I'm going to call it Fred. Why not? And when I set this variable, you see now that the text of the button changes. So again, don't get too tied into this simple example. This is very common. You have variables that are coupled with widgets. Your code makes changes to the variable, and then all the widgets that are coupled to that variable just get changed automatically, right? You don't have to go in and manually do stuff. So one of the nice things about event-driven programming, which is what GUI programs are, is kind of this automation. You try to minimize the amount of code you have to write to reuse stuff and to automate stuff. All right. So now, through the button widget, we've talked a little bit about containers. I will get into more of the other containers later. We talked about one widget so far, or 2 widgets, really, the main window and the button. We used the layout manager, but we didn't really talk about it at all. We'll talk about it more later. But we did take a look at Tkinter variables, and the ability to couple a variable with a widget is one of the very powerful features of a Tkinter variable. Tkinter variables also have another very powerful feature, which we'll get to momentarily. And then we did take a high-level look at events and bindings, because we said that the button widget, when we use that command option, it's basically binding a handler for our event. It's just doing it for us automatically, which makes it easier for us to do. But in another example, we will do it from scratch. All right, so we're 35 minutes in. We've covered some high-level stuff. Now we're going to start to get into more specific stuff. So at this point, I'm going to go back to idle, and I'm going to create a new file. And now I'm going to make the shortest Tkinter GUI program possible. This all looks the same. Now it's a little different. The only last thing I have to add here is this main loop. I add this. I say I want to save it. I'm going to save it to my Tkinter course, and we're going to call this, nope, not that, new prog1.py. So for those of you who aren't familiar with idle, hopefully you are by now, but we used file. Now we've created a file. Now I can come up here and I can run it. And when I run it, it should pop it up. And here, up over here, we see, here's the window that just popped up. Not very interesting because it's just the window. All right. So let's go back now to our main program and actually do a little something better than this. So the first thing I want to show you, as most widgets are configurable, one of the things we can do is we can change the title of that window. Remember before it just said Tkinter. I'm going to call it now, I'm going to call it editor. All right. And I'm also, in this case, I am going to create a text widget, which is going to allow me to enter text. All right. And for now, we're going to change this in like 2 seconds. But for now, we're going to put the text widget right into the main root window. So now I can say tk text root, and that's it. Now, I'm also going to create a button because I need a button, otherwise things look kind of boring. And I'm going to say tk.button. Also going to tell it to be in the root window, or the master, its parent is the root window. And I'm going to say text equals clear. And just for giggles, we are going to say that when we hit that clear button, we want to call the clear function, which we haven't defined yet, but we're about to. All right. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to find this clear function. I'm just going to make it a dummy for now. Okay. So now I have a couple of widgets. I haven't placed them yet. So we'll take a little quick look now at the layout managers. They're not super interesting right now, but we'll do this now. I'm going to start by saying text.pack. There's lots of things we could say, and I'm going to say button.grid. And I'm going to run this and it's going to fail because I've already told you that you can't combine the two. So what happens? Okay, here we get an error, which you guys can see. Cannot use Geometry Manager Grid inside dot, which already has slaves managed by pack. I told you guys about that. All right. And if, well, I closed the window, but the text widget showed up, but the button didn't. So let's change this to pack. And when I run this, now it'll show us both. So here is our window. Here we've got our editor title, great. We've got a text widget we can type into, okay, that's great. And we've got a clear function that I can hit and it does not a damn thing, right? But it looks pretty. So let's exit out of that and say, okay, how can we make this a little better? Well, first of all, I want this to be a capital C. That's just me. How about we look a little more deeply well, first, before we look a little more deeply into that, let's look a little bit more at the layout managers, because I promised you a little bit deeper explanation of that. So the Pack Layout Manager, it has multiple options which control where you put things, how you put things. But the primary, the one we're going to talk about today is side. Okay. Side is like the big mamu, everything else is fluff. All right. Side is just that. It's either top, bottom, left, or right. One of the challenges to Pack is if you want to try to make a complex layout, it gets kind of challenging because you can only do so much and it's not always deterministic. Something simple like this with a couple of widgets, it won't be a problem. So I can say here, side equals left. And then by default, actually I'll do top. Top is the default. Here I can do, this is the same thing, but all of these strings that have to do for sides are already known about by Tkinter, and they have built-in constants, which are pretty much always total uppercase version of the lowercase string. The strings are always going to be lowercase for this, and the constants are always going to be uppercase. So now, when I run this, I see exactly what I saw before. I see the text widget was put to the top, then the clear button was put to the top just below it. Nothing too exciting there. But I also could say, well, let's do left and left. And now we'll see when we run this, we get a completely different look, right? Now the button's on the side, on the right-hand side, because the first text widget went to the left, and then the next widget went to the left again, butted up against the first widget. Do we care? With only 2 widgets, not so much. But when we get further into this program, we'll have more widgets, and we are going to care. So what we're going to do now is say, all right, we don't want to have these widgets right in the main window. We want to create a new container for the buttons because we're going to be more buttons. So what I'm going to do now is say, all right, I'm take my button and I'm going to replace the button. I'm going to get rid of that for now. And I'm going to say my controls, controls equals make controls root. And then maybe I'm going to have a controls pack. And now I'm going to get rid of this. And come up here. I'm going to have a new function called make controls master. I'm going to throw in the button. And what we're going to do is now we're going to create another container called a frame. And I am going to create that frame here. Its parent is going to be master, which we just passed in. And then I'm going to put the button inside that frame. Okay. And then I'm going to return the frame. So what I've done is I've created a new container. Frame is another container. So I create the frame. I put this button, now it's in that frame. And then I return the frame so that when we come back to our make controls call, controls is now a frame. It's a container. And let me just put a note here. This is a container. Now I can pack that container just the way I packed the widget because the frame is just another widget. Okay. So I have my controls and I still have this text, but I'm going to do the same thing now with the text. I'm going to say, I want to do a little bit more, and I just want to modularize my software a little bit. I'm going to say make text. And again, I'm going to pass in master. And again, I'm going to say that I'm going to create this new frame equals tk.frame master. And I'm going to say that the text is child of the frame. And I'm going to return the frame. And it's okay that these are both returning frames because they're different frames, okay? And now down here, I'm going to say, okay, text equals make text of root. All right, so now, and all I've really done now is just reorganize my code, okay? All I've done is reorganize my code because I want to be able to expand these and not have everything get lost, okay? So now if I run this, it should run again, and we should get the same output. Oops, my bad, I didn't pack my text. See what happens when you make a widget, but you don't map it. So I'll run this again. Hopefully it'll show me what I want it to show. Oh, and I forgot to map my widget, let's see, button. I'm gonna map the button too. Now, hopefully it'll be, oh, okay, it's slightly different. It's a little upside down, but that's all right. Controls, we can actually fix that. Controls, pack, text, pack. Before we're saying, okay, I can say controls, I want to pack that. I'm going to say side equals tk dot bottom. And then I can say the text, pack that to the bottom too. And now when I run this, it should come out the way I expect because first the button went to the bottom. And then I said, pack the text also to the bottom and they stack, right? The button and then the text got stacked onto it. So now we have our editor like we had before. So now we can start to expand it a little bit and get into the power of the text widget because the text widget, we're going to talk about two powerful widgets tonight. We'll talk about other widgets too, but the two most powerful widgets we're going to talk about are the text widget and the canvas. Primarily, text is used for text, big surprise. Canvas is used for drawing. And what we're going to do is, I should have mentioned this earlier, we're going to create two demo programs, one to demonstrate text, one to demonstrate canvas. And through the process, we're going to get deeper into some of these layout managers, variables, events, and bindings, okay? And I'll make the code available afterwards, after this event. I'll post the code, I'll post links of the code into the event so you can actually download the code and have a look at it. But these tend to be hands-on. And if you guys want to be following along and doing the same exact thing as I'm doing now, that's great. So looking at text, there's a couple things we'd like to do. First of all, text widgets allow you to not only edit text, to enter text, to delete text. You can do all the things that you would expect to be able to do, but you can also customize the text that's there by doing what they call tagging it, okay? So I could take a piece of a chunk of text and change its color. So let's do that. So I'm going to say, I'm going to add another button. And now this was button pack. Now I'm going to make this the clear button. Because that's what it is. And now I want to add a new button called the red button. And I'm going to use this button to turn text red. And again, I'm going to make a new function that I haven't defined yet, but I'll do that momentarily. And now we come down to the fun part where, you know, I can say, I'm going to say side equals tk dot left. I just want my buttons to all be lined up for now. So I also need to add my dummy function. And now when I run this, now I see two buttons. All right. And the goal is, now we're going to explore the functionality of the text widget a little bit. I want to be able to type in some text and then 1, make some of it red by clicking the red button, but also get rid of it all by hitting the clear button. All right, so now we're going to explore a little bit of the functionality of the text widget here. So let's do red. Well, let's do clear first. The way that we work with text widgets is, again, you have the ability to tag text. When you tag text, it has the ability to change its visual appearance. All right. We do that through something called a tag bind command. And one of the tricks is when we do that, we need to configure it. So here in my make text, I'm going to say that I want to tag bind or tag config, I'm sorry. And I'm going to give it the name of the tag, which I'm going to configure, and we're going to call it red. And then I give it the actual configuration that I want. In this case, we're going to say foreground color equals red. Okay. So now what's going to happen, because I have modified this text widget to include this new tag red, I can add that tag to existing text, or I can add new text with that tag and change its visual appearance. So I've created the tag here. I've configured the tag. Now let's actually use it. How do we do this? So the first thing we want to do is say, okay, we only want to do this when tag is actually selected in the widget. The way we check to see if text is selected is through special, how can I say this? There are certain aspects of the widget, the text widget, which allow us to query whether anything is selected. All right. If it is selected, it tells us the ranges that are selected. And what does that mean? When we look at a text widget like we are now, the lines are all, every character has its own position. All right. So this top line is line 1, and every line below increases a number. So this is line 1, line 2. Where my cursor is right now is position 1.0. If I move it over, it's 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, so on and so forth. So the text widgets use these things called indexes to refer to a certain position in the text widget. And we can query the text widget for certain things. And one of the things we can query is any text selected right now? To do that, we would say ranges equals, and then text. And the call is tag ranges. And then we pass it this constant, which is in reality just SEL, which is a special name for the text widget to say, to refer to selected text. All right. So we query using this tag ranges call whether or not there's any text selected. If there is, ranges is going to have some true value, right? If it's not, then nothing selected. And we can check for that by saying if ranges, then do something. In this case, we would say text dot tag add the color, the tag that we want, in this case is red. And then again, this is a Python thing. We're going to assume for now that it only came back if it found something with 2 values, and by doing this star ranges, it extracts it out. I could also say ranges 0, ranges 1. All right. So now what I'm saying is when I click this red button, I click the red button is configured to call the red function. And the red function queries the text widget and says, do you have any text selected? If so, please add this tag. And we also said that the tag is configured to make the foreground text red. Everybody okay with this? This is, I think, one of the most complicated things we'll look at tonight. So now I'm going to save it and I'm going to run it. And it didn't fail. That's a good sign. Type in some text. I select it. And now I'm going to click on the red button and let's pray, fingers crossed. Oh, we get an error. Frame object has no attribute tag ranges. Oh, let's see. All right. So that's because this is a frame, not. Okay, so let's say text. Oh. Got it. We are not going to do the frame for the text. We don't need it. So instead, we're going to return the actual text. So the text doesn't need its own frame because it's only a single widget. So yeah, let's try this again. This should be a little better. And I come up and I select this and I say red. And now the text has gone red. All right, so what happened? Well, we've explained what happened. Let's not do that again. The other thing we can look at in, is this clear function. How do we get rid of all the text that's in the widget? So the text widget has some functions which are in the online. Whoops. We can come down here. This is the older reference, which I really like. And we can come down and look at the text widget. We can look at some of the methods on text widgets, and we'll see that delete is the one we want. And then there's also insert, which allows us to programmatically insert text, which we could do, but we're going to do delete for now. There are in this world, we mentioned that the indexes have this, kind of this 1.0 format, right? It's a line number dot column number, all right? But there's actually many different formats to the indexes. These are the ones we'll stick with for today because they're the simplest. What I can do is I can say text.delete, and I'm just going to say to delete all the text. I could check to see if there's any selected text. And if there was selected text, I could just delete the selected text. Or I could delete all the text if nothing's selected. But to make it a little simpler, we're just going to delete everything. So to delete everything, I say my possible earliest, the very first place is 1.0. And then the last one is a special name called end. So now, when we hit the clear function, it should remove all the text from the text widget. And when we run this, I can type in lots of stuff. I can hit the clear button, and now we see all the text goes away. All right. So this is just a little bit of functionality from the text widget. There's, let's see, is there more that we wanted to do? We could grow this a little bit more, but since we're running out of time, we'll move on to our next example. But there are a couple things I want to mention before we leave this. That is, there are all these different widgets, including dialog boxes. And, there's the ability to ask it to open a file name, and it'll give you a pre-canned dialog box that allows you to navigate through and open up file names. The simple dialog boxes to query for just a string or an integer or a float number. There's all the stuff built into the Tkinter. Let's jump now to our second example problem, which will allow us to get a little further into, let's see, I just want to see if there's anything that I didn't cover here that I wanted to. There's still more stuff I'd like to cover, but I think we did, other than the opening the file name, and we didn't get a chance to talk about the callback. Well, there's one more little thing I want to talk about. It's going to be a little bit out of context, but no, we'll save it. We'll save that for another thing. Okay. So does anyone have questions now about what we've done up until this point?
Guy, I think I missed it. The text.delete. What's the first argument there?
So this is a first index followed by a last index. So the first index 1.0 is the very first position in the text widget. When you're doing,
okay.
Yep.
Okay.
So I could have said,
So it's not start. It doesn't start from 0.
It doesn't. The line numbers start at 1, but the column numbers start at 0.
Okay.
And let's see, to make this slightly more interesting, I could change this to say, so this is a little more convoluted. You say, okay, 1.0 end, what the heck does that mean? The text widget will do simple math. And basically this will say, okay, start at the beginning of line 1 and then just go to the end of line 1. So if we run our program and we have multiple lines, it should only delete the first line. It didn't like it. Let's see. Oh, okay. Yeah, I would actually have to say text.index. Oh, still doesn't like it. All right, I'm doing something wrong. I must be having a brain freeze. But what I had started to say before was there's other ways too of defining indexes. This is the simplest one.
Okay.
But there's also the ability to say, okay, tell me where the mouse is and tell me which character position in the text widget is closest to the mouse. Oh, sorry. My bad. Line end. Try this again. So what happens is we'll call it index math. You enter in what can be a string, and basically the text widget will kind of go through the math for you. So line end is the ability to basically says, take this index and go to the end of that line. Okay. You can also have like plus a word, and it figures out what a word is. You can add and subtract, add characters. different lengths, but there's all sorts of math that goes on in the text widget, which allows you to do different things. But for today, we'll leave it at this, and perhaps at a later time we can get deeper into the specifics of the widgets. I'm just trying to show you some of the functionality of a text widget, and now I want to show you some of the functionality of a canvas widget, and then we'll wrap and ask if people have questions.
Thanks.
No worries. All right, so let's close this. So now I'm going to I'm going to get rid of this, save it, and now I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call this something else, but again, import Tkinter as tk. Root equals tk.tk and main loop. And we're going to call this new prog2. Bring this back over here. Maybe we'll keep this around in case we want to copy some code out of it. So the next thing I want to look at is the canvas widget. The canvas widget is very powerful, and it allows you to do drawing. And so I can say canvas equals tk.canvas. And again, I'll say it's the root. And I'm going to also do my controls equals make controls. In fact, I think I'm just going to copy that code from here. And we'll tweak it a little bit. But basically, we want to say we want a clear button still. We're going to have still a clear func. We don't need the red. And that might do the trick. So we have our canvas. We have our controls, make controls, root. And then we're going to pack our canvas, pack our controls. And actually this time we'll do it a little differently. This time we'll use grid. And here I'm going to say row equals 0, column equals 0. And for controls, I'm going to say row equals 1, column equals 0. So before, when we were looking at the pack, we said that the primary argument for pack is the side, right? And we said that side could be top, bottom, left, or right. And if we want to pack things in a row, in a straight line, vertical, horizontal, that's no problem. Pack is great for that. But when things start to get more complicated as how you lay it out, you can either start throwing packed widgets into a frame and then pack the frames. As an example, I like this. Well, I didn't need to be that big. If I were creating 12, say I had 12 images and I wanted to map them out this way, I would probably use the grid, because with grid, I can say row and column, right? So the way that the pack is all about top, bottom, left, right, it's kind of like it's kind of one-dimensional. You can do two-dimensional stuff, but it gets much trickier. Whereas grid is meant for two-dimensional, right? So I could say row equals 0, column equals 0, row equals 1, column equals 1. I could lay all of these 12 out at the same time in grid, easy peasy, all right? Could I do it with pack? Yes. It'd just be a little bit more work. I might do these 4 left buttons in a frame, and I would pack the 4 buttons vertically. And then when I'm actually packing the frame, I would pack the frame to the left. All right. Then I do the next 4 buttons vertically and then pack that frame to the left. So I could get this 12 buttons 3x4, but with pack, it would just be more work. I'd need some frames, some interim frames, but I could get what I want. But for the most part, if you're doing something that requires, complex layouts, grid is usually going to be the easier way to go. So for now, we'll use grid here. And things aren't going to get too terribly complicated. In this example, we're going to look a little bit more into, variables and events and bindings, because the drawing program is kind of cool. The drawing program is kind of more where the rubber hits the road in Tkinter. I mean, look, there's lots of simpler widgets too. There are labels, right? It's just pure little text. There are entry. There's an entry, which is a single line of text. There are, list boxes, which is a list of items. But the 2 most powerful basic widgets, I would say, are the text and the canvas. So those are the 2 we're focusing on today, and we'll maybe stagger across some of the others in the process. So here, hopefully we have something that runs. We don't. What does it dislike? Row must be after da 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 da. Oh, because this needs to be grid. Okay. So what we're going to do now is we're going to have the canvas, which we're going to use to draw, and we're going to have the controls, which are going to be some buttons. And this should pop up, and here we have what we have. Now, I'm still going to go in and I'm going to configure the canvas a little bit to make it more obvious. So for example, I can say background color equals wheat. I could give it a size, but it's not really the most interesting part of what we're doing. I will give it a border. I'll give it some relief. Well, actually, if we run it now, we'll see it, but it's not really super obvious, right? It doesn't have a border, it doesn't have relief. So let's say relief equals tk.solid, and bd, which is the alias for border width, equals 2. And when I run it now it's very obvious where our canvas is. And O, for this, we're going to title this one drawing. So we've got the basics, but now the trick is, how do we actually draw? All right. So I would say that there's always a million ways to solve a problem, but for the sake of today, we're going to look at what allows us to kind of demonstrate the different widgets. And in this case, we want to talk about handling events, and we want to talk about binding events to handlers so that we can draw. So I propose this. I propose that a really good way to implement this program would be to say, okay, right now I know my mouse is moving around. Those are generating a bunch of events, but nothing's happening. All right. What about my proposal is this? I propose that if I click my left mouse button down and I hold my mouse button down, that should start me drawing. I want to be able to click the left mouse button down, hold it, move the mouse around, and be drawing while I'm doing that. And then when I let up the left mouse button, drawing stops. All right. That's what I propose for this project. Okay. So the question is, how do we do that? Well, we know a few things. We know that we can, let me just move this up here because we're going to be seeing him again. We'll move this behind here. We know that there are bindings which allow us to tie to events and then basically have handlers which do something. So now what I want to do is I want to have I want to capture 3 different events. I want to capture the event where I click the left mouse button and when I release it. And I want to capture the event when I'm moving the mouse around while the left mouse button is down. Okay. So now I'm going to take my little canvas and I'm actually going to break it into a new function 2. I'm going to say make canvas master. It's going to look pretty similar to what we did before. And I'm going to say canvas equals this. And I'm going to say return canvas. So now I haven't changed oops, I haven't changed anything. All right, all I've done is I've just restructured my program to create the canvas in a function that is then returns a canvas. And I'm doing this for a reason. This is how I choose to organize my code. I'm doing this because now I'm going to modify the canvas. I'm going to configure it to say, hey, I want to capture some of these events. And I'd rather do it here in this make canvas function than do it in the root, in the main body of the code. Okay. So we do that. We bind events using the bind call. And so I say canvas.bind. And then I'm going to have, as we can see, sequence. Sequence is the event. All right. We're going to start easily. We're going to do this in a couple stages, and then we'll see what happens. All right. The first event I want to capture is what's called button -1. Okay. And button 1 means that the left mouse button was pressed. Okay. So I'm just going to call this pressed. It's a callback function that we haven't defined yet, but we're going to go back and define it. Okay. Or better yet, let me call this canvas press 1, right? Because button 1 was pressed. I also want to say canvas.bind. Whoops. Button release -1. Canvas release 1. Okay. And so we'll talk about these for just a moment. So these things are events. The events are set up such that, usually you have your primary event. First of all, the events are within the less than and greater than. Right. First of all, the event is a string. It's within the less than and greater than symbols. And we see that it's actually separated with this dash. The first part is like the base part of the event, dash, and then some modifier. In this case, this says a button was pressed, and then we're saying, and it's actually button 1, which is the left mouse button. Okay. Here we say a button was released, and it was the 1 button. All right. So what we're telling the GUI is don't ignore these events anymore. When these events happen, I want you to call my handler so I can do something about them. All right. So now we're going to come up and say, keep things alphabetical, say def canvas press 1. Canvas release 1. And so we have our dummy events, but there's actually one more thing that we have to do here. I mean, a few more things, but when you bind an event to a handler, the handler is going to receive an event object. All right. So we're actually going to put an event object in each of these, because the event object is what actually has the information that's really of most interest to us. Okay. And then I'm going to slide in the third one, which is the one that's actually going to do the drawing. It's going to look a little more interesting. V1 motion, canvas, draw. And then I'm going to come up here and I'm going to add def canvas draw event. All right. So now we have the ability to tell the GUI Tkinter capture these events so I can do something with them. Now, if I try to run this, nothing's going to happen, but let's run it anyways. Whoops. Oh, sorry. That's not, you don't spell bind with an A? Okay. So when we run this, sorry. Motion is capitalized. I'll get this right sooner or later. Okay. So here we have our canvas again. And I'm clicking the mouse button, nothing's happening. But we are indeed capturing, and we can prove this. We can say, let's do this. Let's say for draw, we're going to say print event. And actually, let's just quickly take this and put that here, here, here. And when we run this, I'm going to click. All right. See, button press showed up, if you can see beneath. Button press event, num equals 1, x equals y equals. So what it's doing, it's telling me the event is a button press event. Num equals 1 is the mouse button number and the coordinates. And now I release, and it gives me that it's a button release, same coordinates. So what I want to do, and then I can also press, move around, and release. So now I'm grabbing the events I want. All right. I see that I'm grabbing the events I want. Now I just have to draw. But I'm getting the events I want. So to draw, this is kind of more of a little bit now more of a coding thing. We'll talk a little bit about the canvas in a moment, but we're going to have in Canvas Press. So one thing I should mention, so root, our root window, right, is a Tkinter object. One of the lovely things about the Tkinter objects is they are easily extensible with attributes. So I can use it as a global beyond what it is, and I can use it to say, store my start location, and I'm going to make that event.x, event.y. Okay, so we know up here, when I press, when I release, and when I move, I'm always getting these XY coordinates. All right, so when I press, I'm going to grab that XY coordinates because I know I'm about to start drawing. When I release, I'm going to free it up. Theoretically, I don't really have to, but I'm just going to do it. So now I can get rid of the return here. And I'm going to get rid of the return here because they were really just placeholders before. And all that's left at this point is to say, how do I actually draw a damn line? What's going to happen is every time the mouse moves a little bit, I'm going to add a little line. So if we take a quick look at the methods on the canvas, we'll see that in addition to adding tags and all that sort of stuff, we can create, where's my, I must have missed it. We have the ability to create objects. Oh, they're below. One of the objects we can create, as you can see here, arcs, which are curved lines, bitmaps, image, lines, and that's what we're gonna use. Ovals, polygon, rectangle, text, and windows. So we can draw a whole bunch of things, but for today, to keep things simple, we're just gonna draw a line. And when we wanna create a line, it takes in coordinates and it takes in, well, a variable number of coordinates, but for us, we're just gonna be drawing a line between 2 points, so it's easy peasy. And then it returns an ID, all right? For what we're doing today, we don't care about the ID. We're gonna have a million of these things, but we don't care about them. I am going to grab this and I'm gonna come over here and I'm gonna say, okay, for my draw event, I'm gonna say, throwing away the ID, which I don't care about. Actually, I'll grab the ID anyways. ID equals, we're gonna say canvas dot create line, and then the coordinates are what we have from before, root dot start dot x. Oh, I'm sorry, no, root dot start, first one, root dot start, second one, and then event.x and event.y. All right. And I believe by doing this, this should allow us to draw. So I'm going to hit run. I'm going to move this over here. And I click down, we get our first event, and now I start to move. And holy moly. Oh, wait. That's not doing too good. That's not what we wanted. Something's off. It's our logic.
Yeah, I think we have to always do event.x and event.y.
No, we actually have to update here.
Yeah.
So here we have to say, okay, now we've drawn this line. Now let's set root.start equal to event.x and event.y. So we're always going to be using the last dot as the starting point for the new line. And so now if I run this again, it comes out the way we expect. The last thing I want to do, and we're almost out of time anyways, but the last thing I want to do is be able to say clear and have this line go away. So there's one other thing that we'll look at quickly with the canvas, and that is with the canvas, you have the ability to tag objects. You can keep the ID, which is returned, and I could keep all the IDs and then use all those IDs to make it go away, make them all go away. But instead, I can tag give it a particular tag. And so now when I do each of these, when I'm drawing each of these, it's adding the tag drawn to each object that's created, okay? And then because of the way Canvas is set up, I can say, I want to delete everything that's associated with that tag. So here in the clear function, I can say canvas dot delete, and then I give it the tag name. Okay. And now as I'm drawing every line, and there's so many, all these lines are getting tagged with the tag drawn. And here, when I come to clear them, I can just say delete anything that's tagged with drawn. So now when I run it, I can still do my drawing. And now when I come and click on clear, it all goes away. All right. So there's still one more thing I didn't really get a chance to talk about tonight, and I regret that. That is menus. We have the ability to basically add a menu to something. Let me just copy the code. And again, because I said to you guys, I would give you the code afterwards. I'm going to add a menu to this very quickly. I'm going to start by saying, cutting in and pasting in a predefined chunk of code that creates a menu. The menu, the menu constructor, it's just another class. All right, again, I'm going to pass in root to it, but this is going to be configured slightly differently than we did before. So here, the main menu item is still going to be of type menu. And then I'm going to define another menu item that's going to be piggybacked off of this, right? I'm going to call that my file menu. And then I'm going to add a command to the menu so that I could actually click on the menu and it would work. When the menu is done, I then have one more call, this add cascade, which is then going to add that, call it a submenu, to the main menu bar. So the menu bar is the thing that goes across the top. Then you have submenus or menus that drop down, right? So this little chunk of code creates a simple file menu. And just so it looks a little nicer, it adds a second dummy for help. So when I create menu, when I call create menu, it returns this menu bar. The menu bar is handled a little differently than the other widgets. The menu bar will get configured rather than being placed. So I can say menu bar equals create menu, and I'm going to pass in my root. And now, because I want the menu bar to appear, I say root.config. So I'm configuring my main window, and I say menu equals menu bar. And now my application is going to have a simple menu. So I hit Control, I hit F5 to run, and here's my simple menu. I'm still going to draw, and now help is just a dummy. It was just to make file not look so lonely. But I hit File and I hit Clear, and we see that now we've removed everything again. So that was a ton of stuff to take in. I can't believe we actually got through both examples. It was rather rushed. I'm happy to take questions. If your brains have not yet exploded, I will still do my best to make them explode now. So if anyone has questions, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask away.
Yeah, I got a question. In Prog 1, I guess we can use Prog 2 too. Canvas, is that a global? Is that how all those functions are getting canvas because it's a global variable?
Yes. So here, canvas is created at the, at the most basic level. So canvas and controls are both globals, as is root.
Is it practice to leave those as globals, or if you were writing a professional program, would you be passing those?
If I didn't want them to be globals, quick and dirty, I would probably just make it like root.canvas equals make canvas. You could, because the root is extensible, you could bury any other globals you wanted within root if you wanted to go that route. You can pass things around as variables. You know, they may just be scope issues. But I mean, yeah, you can pretty much do anything you want as long as you do it right.
Can it handle graphics, or is it just static windows, just GUI stuff?
Sorry?
Can Tkinter handle graphics?
Yes. So when we have our button, we said that we could have text in the button, but I could also use an image on the button. Let me see if I can do that really quickly. So if I come over here, let's see, clear button. Okay, it's not the ideal scenario, but we'll do it. In Tkinter, you typically have to do something to grab and process an image. So Tk has something called photo image, which is another, well, let's see. This is not going to be pretty, but let's see. Make controls, frame, clear. Okay. Let me come here and say, I have a smiley.bmp image locally. I'm going to say that my image equals file, and then here, and say text equals image equals image, and compound equals compound. Let's see, what's the value of compound? Equals both? I forget. Oh, no, it's going to be like above or below, I think. Haven't done this in a while, but let's see what happens. Couldn't recognize data in image file, right? It doesn't like that. Let's try the PNG. Still no go. Let me make sure what I have in my directory for files. So I do have a smiley PNG. And I have a cycle PNG. Okay. So image smiley PNG. Get rid of this. And let's see what the actual error is. Oh, of course, I thought it would give me an error and it didn't. Of course, now I don't know where my button is. All right, so the clear but image equals image. And that was before to the left of the red button. Oh, it's probably, let's trial instead of smiley, let's try cycle. All right, oh, my bad, I am doing something stupid. So one of the tricks to all this too is there's garbage collection in Python, which we know. So you have to make sure that your things don't go away. So let's say root.image equals, and then we'll say .image, and hopefully this will solve the problem. And it does. So here we see a button with an image instead of text. And we can do something similar to change the icon. there's also the ability to show text and image. That's the compound, which I believe, I forget if it's like above or below, something like that. So if I say text equals clear, compound equals tk dot above, something like this. No. Well, let's see, what is, well, let's look it up here. Contents. Ah, gotta love good old. You say Python, Tkinter, compound, center. So this TK center. Let's see what the other values are. It'd be easier if I could type. All right, that's. All right, where's left, right, or, no, that's justify. It's not giving me a better. Oh, bottom, left, right, or top. All right. Shame on me for not remembering that. So again, we can have the image and text. And it's, sometimes it's common practice to have, image if it's found, and if it's not, then have the text show up. Any other follow-up questions?
Yeah, actually, that was great. That I didn't stop you, but that wasn't my question because I was interested in what you had to say. But it can handle like moving graphics, like a game or something like that.
Be more specific by can it handle moving graphics?
Like the Google Dinosaur game that you can play in your web browser, something like that. Something like an old Atari arcade game, like Nuke or whatever that game was called, something like that.
So Tkinter can, in fact, I mean, there are special libraries. I mean, I think Turtle is a library for gaming, but we looked at the canvas for drawing.
Mhm.
You can draw objects on the canvas and you can move objects on the canvas. So if you wanted to, you could simulate drawing a box on the canvas and then like actually moving it. You could move it with the arrow keys. You could drag it. There is the ability to do that. It's all supported by the canvas widget.
So Hangman, coding something like Hangman would be completely within the realm of possibility.
Yeah, I don't recall Hangman so much dragging stuff around, but yeah, I mean,
Drawing line, you could like specify the pixel or the column in the line that you want to create lines with and like draw like a Hangman stand that way.
okay. I mean, I expect that you can do just about anything you want through Tkinter. The only question is going to be, is it going to be the best choice for the project you're trying to do? If you're trying to make a game, I think Tkinter is really not possibly the best GUI for games. I'm sure that there are GUIs that are more specific, specialized for gaming. But I honestly don't know because I don't use any of the other GUIs.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Yep. Anyone? Bueller. I never get tired of that joke. Any other questions?
I mean, if there's no on-topic questions, I do have an off-topic question.
Let her rip.
So this is great as a GUI, but is there a way to actually start building executable files with Python? Whenever I've tried doing that and I send it to someone who does not have all of the million libraries that I'm using, it ends up crashing. It just doesn't work.
There's a couple that come to mind. Py2exe, if you want to create for the Windows, Py2app for the Mac, and PyInstaller. So Py2exe and PyInstaller will both create standalone applications for the Windows machine. The question is going to be, is it creating like a single fat executable padded with all the resources that are required, or do you end up having like giving them a directory, an entire directory of files, and they extract it all out and they can run the executable and it works because everything else it needs is there. If you want to get more, if you want to do a packager, if you want to actually package and have like a setup file, an installation file, it gets a little more complicated, but all that stuff can be done.
Okay, because I've tried doing with PyInstaller and Py2exe. Usually it doesn't find all the dependencies. So it finds a fair number of them, but doesn't find all the dependencies.
You get errors while it's creating?
No. When it's sent to someone who does not have everything on their computer. So I'm building it with, not for a game, but I have a bunch of data science related libraries that I'm pulling out of. And when I send it to someone who does not have Python installed, it creates some problems.
The best thing I can tell you,
there's something else out there which is more robust.
I mean, the best thing I can tell you in a situation like that would be to have, a dummy machine to test it on before you send it out. If you use virtual machines, VirtualBox is freeware, and you can set up a a Windows virtual machine and see if it'll run.
Okay.
I know that way back when I started my project, my text editing project, I started in Python 2. This was, before Python 3 was even out. I've been working on this project a long time. And, I had Py2exe was being used to generate all the files I needed. And then I had something called setup, which was actually taking those files and creating an installation file, a single exe to send to somebody who could then install and get everything nicely installed. Do keyword, it would do, registry entries, everything. And then in the process of going from Py2 to Py3, for a while, Py2exe wasn't supporting later versions of Py3. And now recently it's been updated so it does, but it's still not quite as smooth. My system that I had before, which took a long time to put together, was, is kind of broken now, and I'll have to fix it at some point. But the ideal, of course, is to be able to send, if you're trying to actually distribute something to, looking professional, you want it to be just a single executable file that, runs and installs. And
thanks. And thanks a lot for the whole tutorial.
You're welcome. It was more convoluted than I intended it to be. I thought it would be like really basics, but what fun would that have been? There's one other thing I should mention too, which I didn't get a chance to get to also, because there was some functionality that got left out. But I had mentioned that, that the Tkinter variables have two very powerful features. One being the ability to couple them with widgets. But another very powerful feature is the ability to add callbacks or trace functions that get triggered when the variable changes. You can config a Tkinter variable to trigger the calling of a function when the variable gets read or written and usually it's when it's written to, but you can also do it so that when it's read, when anytime somebody reads the Tkinter variable, it kicks off a function. And that's also very powerful because it's very common, you do some processing and then you want to maybe you want to refresh your entire GUI.
Yeah.
So you update some Tkinter variable with some new value, and all of a sudden that kicks off a callback function, which like refreshes your entire GUI.
But isn't the main loop doing just that? Isn't it just essentially running it repeatedly?
The main loop is waiting on events, but you still need to handle the events. You still need to choose which events get handled and how. And at the end of the day, there's always different ways to do things, right? I mean, I could say, all right, I press the button. I press the button. So now my button code is going to call a function that's going to go update all my my widgets. It's going to update my my other two button widgets,
Yeah.
and a text widget. And then I'm also going to call code that updates, the location of those two buttons.
Yeah, I think that's quite helpful.
Well, but that's maybe not the best way to do it, because what happens if you don't want to do the whole process? What happens if, maybe sometimes I just want to update one button, but not the other? It would be nice if I can trigger all that happening automatically, rather than having to say, I've got all this code that does all these changes, but what if I just break that code into chunks and have each chunk tied to a different widget, and it only gets called when it has to?
Yeah, something like activating a button only if there is text entered in a box or something like that.
Well, that's something you can do also, right? I mean, we didn't even talk about keyboard strokes and any of that stuff too, because basically anytime you do anything in a GUI program, it's an event somewhere. There's, like I said, there's a lot to this. But hopefully this guy gives you a real crash course on how to make a GUI app. And then you just got to dive through the docs and look at all the specifics, because there are, there's another thing I didn't mention, which is, there are the Tkinter has like these core set of widgets, all right? But there's a second set of widgets within Tkinter called TTK, themed Tk widgets. And we saw how we could go into a button and configure the visual aspects of the button. We said we could change the background color, the foreground color, the border width, whether or not it's, the relief, right? But these themed widgets say, hey, all that visual stuff, we're going to put into a separate widget called a theme, like a widget-like theme. And then you couple the theme to the widgets. And then when you update the theme, all the coupled widgets change. So if I had 20 buttons and, I didn't want to go through code that changed the visual appearance of all 20 buttons, I could just couple all 20 buttons with one theme and just change the theme. But those are two different types of buttons. One is a themed button, the other is not a themed button. And then the themed widgets, the TTK widgets, include some extra widgets that the standard Tkinter doesn't. So like there's a notebook which gives you like tabs. So you can have like a multi-tab, like the same way all the browsers now are multi-tabbed. You could have multiple tabs, and spin box, corners that you make a corner you can more easily grab to drag. There's so many things. So you just got to like dig through the docs just to get a feel, or watch some online tutorials about all the different widgets that are out there. I covered the canvas and the text because I thought they were the two most powerful widgets. But even those, we just scratched the surface. There's so much more you can do with the text. There's so much more you can do with the canvas. I mean, it would be like 8 to 12 hours to really go through all of Tkinter and talk about every widget, and like give an overview of every widget in Tkinter and the TTK. It would take a long time.
Make a YouTube playlist, huh? All right. Thanks a lot, Guy. Really
Well,
appreciate it.
my pleasure.
All right.
Any departing questions, guys?
Yeah, one just last quick one. Is Tkinter the most popular GUI library in Python, or are there others that have large support?
I don't know the numbers. My understanding is that Tkinter is not the most popular. I was actually just doing a little research earlier, but let's see, do I have a page open on that? Thought I did, but I don't, or at least I'm not finding it now. Python GUI libraries. From what I understand, Tkinter is not the most popular. WX Python, GTK. Guise is the one that's on Android. That's so here we're looking at the list of the 6 best Python GUIs. So Guise, PyQt, Tkinter, WX Python, PyGUI, PySide. I'm not sure I've used all of these. And I can't even tell you why I ended up using Tkinter on my current project. I don't even remember. Maybe because it was just packaged. You know, it's always been packaged with Python, and so it's just easy to use out of the box.
Gotcha.
But if I could do it over again, I'd probably use Guise, because Guise seems to be fully supported on Android. And I'm not sure which of these other ones. Tkinter is not fully supported on Android. I'm not sure these other ones, which ones are supported on Android. PySide support. Oh, see, so PySide support for Android is in the plans for the near future. Yeah. Great. So Guise would be, if I were to redo my project from scratch, I'd probably do Guise or KIV, however it's pronounced, because it's got the Android support, which actually I would like to have, and iOS support. So I think a lot depends on your platforms too. You know, Tkinter is simpler, probably, than some of these other ones, and it's limited by platforms. You know, I'd look and see how complex do you need your GUI to be, and what platforms do you need to support, and I'd make a decision based on that. But my quick and dirty is, if you need Android or iOS, or at least Android, you'd probably want Guise.
Cool. Well, thanks, Gary. I appreciate it. It's very illuminating, and I hope I can create a project soon with this information.
Cool. All right, guys, thanks for coming. I appreciate it. As I mentioned, I'll put the 2 test programs. I'll make them available to you guys through the comments in the event description. And I thank you for coming.
All right. Take it easy, Gary.
Take care, guys. Have a good night.